a video on my sourdough starter. So, I think the problem with my sourdough starter, it started to smell quite alcoholic. Yeah, it smells alcoholic, which I fixed it. It started to smell like a little bit just like alcohol before. So what I did was I took a small amount of the starter and kind of made a new starter from it. But it's happened again, that it's now starting to smell of alcohol, and it's affecting the bread. I think what's happening is in the proving process, the alcohol is attacking the gluten, and it's not rising as much as it used to do. It's still nice, it tastes nice. It's got a really kind of quite sour taste to it, the last batch of bread. I haven't got any because I cut it up and I put it in the freezer, otherwise I would show you. But it's just not as rising as much. So I think the starter is going to be dying soon. So this is an opportunity to start I can still make bread out of it. Like I could make another batch of bread kind of quite easy, but it just wouldn't be as nice. So it's a good opportunity while I've still got some sourdough starter before it dies to make some more. And then it's also another good opportunity to have a little bit of an experiment with making a starter, because I won't need any for bread for 2 weeks, which is ample time to make another starter. So what you normally do when making a starter is you take 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water, mix it together using the hands, because there's yeast all around us. There's yeast on our hands, there's yeast in the air, there's yeast on all the surfaces. So yeast is everywhere. So then what you do is mix it around. Hopefully some of the yeast from the air and your hands mixes in with the flour and water, and slowly over time it creates a yeast culture. Every day what you do is you throw half the mixture away, add in the same amount of flour and water again. So if you throw in, if it's 200 grams of flour and 200 grams of water, you throw 200 grams of the starter away, you add in another 100 grams of water and another 100 grams of flour, mix it around, and then hopefully after 5 or 6 days, depending on the time of year, you have like a strong enough yeast culture that it will be able to easily proof bread. Now what I have done in the past is I kept all the bits of sourdough starter, instead of throwing them away every day, I kept them and used those in my first batch of bread. I didn't want to waste them because I don't like waste, and it seems silly that you're going to throw it away. So I used that in the first batch of bread and adjusted the amount of water and flour that I put in the bread according to the starter. Obviously there's a lot more water in that, so I compensated by putting less water in the bread mix. I hope that makes sense. Kind of makes sense to me. But I was thinking, do we really need to? Why do we throw half the starter away a day when we're trying to make a starter? What's the purpose of that? Surely if we just mix it up every day, if any yeast has landed on top of the flour and water, surely it's better to do that and kind of mix it in every day and not throw half of it away. Or maybe it's we're trying to get the yeast, there's some yeast in the flour, but not always the case, because flour gets bleached and processed. So I was just kind of thinking, let's have a go at not throwing half the starter away a day. So in here we've got 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water, and every day I'm just going to mix it up. I'm going to see what happens. And if it doesn't work, and if it just goes bad and goes off, then we'll throw it away and start again and go back to the normal process of throwing half the starter away and replacing it with fresh flour and water every day. And then we'll know the reason why we don't do it. But I just kind of thought, why do we have to do that? It seems a waste of flour. And certainly in times when things are a little bit tight with money, everything isn't just as available as you'd like. So I just kind of thought it'd be an interesting experiment, because I need to do it. So let's have a play around. I'm just using the cheap supermarket bread flour, which I've talked about in the past, but no one watches my videos. Well, not on this anyway. And I just, cheap supermarket flour is fine for baking bread. You just have to work a little bit harder with it. Whereas if some of the expensive bread flours are a little bit easier to work with, but there's nothing wrong with the strong white flour from the supermarkets, the cheap stuff. It works all the same. You just have to adjust the amount of water. Sorry, I'm burping. You just have to adjust the amount of water that you use when making the bread. But I'm getting off the subject. We're talking about making a new sourdough starter, but that's it. So we'll come back every day. We'll see how it's going. It looks a bit gloopy at the moment, but that's just because the flour hasn't soaked up all the water yet. So it'll look a little bit better tomorrow. So we'll give it a mix it with my hands. I didn't want to mix it with my hands today. Well, I have done, but I didn't want to do because I then have to turn off the camera. But anyway, but there we go. The starter's looking a bit grey as well. Probably ferment some. There's probably some fruit into alcohol with that. But anyway, there we go. That's what we're doing. And over the next 4 or 5 days, we'll see what happens to the starter. Right, so 24 hours later, and I've got 1 or 2 bubbles, but I think that might just be down to the mixing process. So I've just washed my hands, but anyway, so we'll use my hands to mix it. So if there is any yeast on my hands, it will add to the yeast, and any yeast that's collected on the top, kind of like fallen onto it and got stuck there, we'll mix that in, and then hopefully that will create do it that way. If we need to add a little bit more water, we will do. But you see, it's a lot smoother now. So mix it in, fold the top over, and then we get yeast off my hands, and then the yeast off the top mixed into underneath, and then hopefully be able to collect some more yeast on the top over the next 24 hours, but we'll see what happens. So, day 3, and I've noticed that the starter is starting to discolour. We've got some bubbles rising to the top. I think that's more probably a case of when I've mixed it, that's bubbles getting down, trapped, and then slowly coming to the top, rather than fermentation happening. But it's starting to discolour, which would lead me to believe that that's going off. But let's just give it a taste. What does that one taste like? A little bit sour. A little bit sour. So I'm going to make another one at the same time. We're going to do the proper process where we're going to start it. So there's 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water. I'll throw half of that away. I've mixed it around already. I'll throw half of that away. I won't throw half of that away. I'll keep half of it and we'll put that in the first batch of bread. But discard half, add more, 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour, mix it again, and away we go. We'll carry on doing this one as well, and then we'll kind of find it out. But I don't really want to waste time by finding out that that one's gone wrong, and then I've wasted 3 days making that I could have spent the time making a starter. So we'll give this one a mix. I can't use my hands because I've been swimming, so there'll be no yeast on my hands whatsoever. So we'll just give that a mix over. I see, it's not so bad underneath. It's not so bad underneath. So it might work. So any I want to say bacteria, but any yeast that's collected on the top of the starter will now be mixed in, and hopefully we'll be able to collect some more yeast on the top. But we'll keep them both going. We'll see what happens over the next few days. So it looks like that's starting to ferment. So we've collected some yeast. So the bubbles coming through. So it's pointless carrying on doing that one by throwing half away and then adding more flour to that, because it's just a waste of flour. Even though I wouldn't waste the flour, but it's just a waste. So let's mix this one in, and then hopefully we'll collect more yeast on top, and the yeast that we've collected on the top that we've now mixed in will start reproducing and create a stronger yeast culture in there. And there we go. And then we'll just leave this one as is. We'll give it a bit of a turnover. So I suppose maybe they won't look like it. Maybe the yeast is fighting off other bacteria. So where's that? When that one was starting to go a little bit grey in colour, like yesterday. Well, like yesterday, yeah. Maybe that was bacteria starting to break down the flour and the water, and the yeast acted like the yeast that we've collected acted like a penicillin and kind of like fought off other kind of yeasts and bacteria that were trying to turn the flour off. Maybe that's kind of potentially what it does, like the dominant yeast fights off any other yeast cultures that land on it, or bacteria cultures that land on it, and the yeast that's in there kind of fights them off. Maybe that kind of makes sense to me. It might not be true, but there we go. So we'll see what it's like in another 24 hours, but it should be even more bubbly than it was. So there we go. The 4 or 5, can't remember. That's definitely worked. So we don't need to throw half of the starter away and replenish it with fresh flour every day, do we? So people always do it that way. No one's ever questioned why they do it that way, or if they have to do it that way, as always. But there we go. I'm always curious in answering the questions that no one wants the answers to. This is the other one. It's gone a little bit grey on top, but it's fine when you mix it in. So if we leave that for another 3 or 4 days, exactly the same will happen to that as happened to that. So I will make some bread with that starter, and we'll see how it turns out. So I'll just give it another couple of days to really get going, and then we'll make some bread. So we don't need to. The next part of the video will be the bread that I kind of do, and it will just be a case of ta-da! Really should end it on that, shouldn't I? So we'll end it on a ta-da! Ta-da! So that works, doesn't it? We don't have to throw half the sourdough starter away every day. So a success. Although I've slightly burnt the chopping board. There we go. Nice loaf.